Andrew, not me, emails in and says, Ben, in the past, you and Andrew have briefly remarked on the potential for automated enforcement of copyright infringement.
Wait, did we
do you
that?
really? I don't know. I'm sure somewhere along the way we have. Do you really think such a model is possible? Any such system would have to be automated. Real artists may release novel IP one morning and be infringed upon by the afternoon. So someone will need to create a highly scalable and available registry of copywritten material. The government will have to recognize it, and then all models everywhere will need to train and validate against this system. Then there will be entire data centers of copyright trolls generating and registering as much novel IP as they can get away with. There will need to be an appeals process from there. All of this seems highly impractical to do at a global scale in a way that makes everyone happy, and there will still be pirate LLMs that people can run on their iPhone that will evade these restrictions, or maybe Apple and all other hardware vendors have to ensure that only approved models could run. I don't know. This looks like a classic case where nobody has a good idea of what will happen when this friction is removed, and the resulting landscape is unlikely to look anything like the current one. The New York Times position in its lawsuit seems reasonable from its perspective, but I just don't see how a solution would be workable. Ben,
no, I remember. I think I know what he's referring to. I talked about this in the context of whenever there's that Usher song that was made by AI, and then there's like YouTube takedowns and all those sorts of things. That's
exactly when it came up. Yep.
Yeah, and so my point there, actually, I think I'm glad you brought this up because it was a good sort of reminder. Was a so there's this aspect of aggregators, right? YouTube is an aggregator. An aggregator is also a choke point. And so we see this in the context, again, to go back to the internet censorship point, which is this is a throat to choke. It's not the government, right? There's no First Amendment concerns. And so there's a lot of pressure on a YouTube, on a Facebook, on a Twitter, or actually whatever, to sort of limit certain content because they're capable of doing it. And you can have, again, a philosophical debate about like the law of free speech versus the spirit of free speech and all these sorts of things. But just from a technical perspective, that is like sort of a throat to choke. Now, set that aside as point number one. Point number two is I have this idea of a framework for moderation on the internet, which is I actually think it's reasonable for aggregators, particularly ones that are algorithmically serving content, to have more aggressive sort of moderation schemes than the First Amendment, right? Like at the end of the day, if Facebook is promoting posts to you or the YouTube algorithm is pushing stuff in your face, I think it's incumbent on them to actually be careful about what they are pushing on. You move down the stack to something that is not have an algorithm, that is just a platform that lets you post stuff. There, I'm very hesitant. I think they should be much closer to what is legally permissible, but I can understand if they go a little further. This sort of touches on the Substack one too a little bit. Then you go down to infrastructure. I am resolutely, absolutely opposed to any sort of censorship at the infrastructure layer. Your ISP should not be reaching in to examine the packets going over their connection and cutting some off and not cutting off others. To me, that I think as you step down the stack, algorithm stuff at the highest, most moderation. I think that's reasonable. Platforms, very limited moderation. Infrastructure, no moderation. And I think that's the way to think about this very, very tricky problem sort of in context. That's point number two. Point number three is what I think is super important on the internet is the internet. We've talked about the context of LLMs, the difference between deterministic computing, where you put a number in, you expect a number out. And if it's not that, it's a bug somewhere in the program versus an LLM that's probabilistically give you what is probably the right answer, but it's not necessarily right. And it's incredible how accurate it sort of often is. And that there's sort of a distinction there. I think that applies to the internet versus the analog world. The analog world, you go and print something, right? There's actually you actually went to a printing press and there was this sort of point of friction that I think lends itself to a more sort of deterministic enforcement. Like, did someone actually copyright that book? Did they actually print an illegal version or did they not? It's very black and white. Once you get on the internet, it gets a lot fuzzier because it's trivial to duplicate something. It's trivial to sort of spread something. And so I think you need a more probabilistic sort of approach where you want to knock off the big stuff, but you don't want to go too far because it's going to be impractical, as Andrew notes, and you're also likely to chill sort of expression. And so in this case, so point number 4, which is stratechery.
Okay.
With stratechery, it's copyrighted. You have to pay to get access to my content. Now, can you get access to my content without paying? Sure, right? There's companies that will like set up one email address and they're spreading it all internally, right? And it's like, it's ridiculous that they're doing this, but it does.
Don't do that.
Please don't do that.
Taking food off my table.
It's just a crappy thing to do, right? But like,
yeah,
it gives me insight into, I guess, the nature, the culture of that organization. But so you have that sort of like, but what I don't want to do is there's lots and lots of people who don't do that, who come in and pay, and I want to give them a great experience. I want them to get the emails, no problem. I want to be able to quick link at the email and they're logged in. They don't through a paywall. They get it to it super easy. You can go to the show notes of this episode. You can click something and log right in. I spent a lot of money to make that possible because I want there to be a great experience for my readers. And if the cost of that is some people being jerks, then on the internet, that's just a cost you have to be willing to pay. That's just how the internet works. If you want to have a large audience, you're going to have bad actors, and you need to sort of accept that and deal with it. I particularly when I first started, there's people that always come to me for advice about doing this, right? And there's some people that get so worked up about people pirating their stuff. And it's like, you're just not going to make it. On the internet, you have to have an abundance mindset. You have to think, I'm going to make up for the cheaters by getting that many more good people, because you're never going to sort of limit it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but in order to police the potential cheaters, you would have to make the user experience just a lot
much worse
more
for the actual customers. Right.
Yeah,
right.
Netflix ran into this with the password sharing thing, where there's a version of their enforcement where you have to sign in every single time. I have to do that with the NBA app, which
it's terrible.
It's not an enforcement strategy. That's just them having a fucking horrible app. but it makes me want to delete it and just never use it again. And if it was just really inconvenient to use Netflix anytime I wanted to, like, eventually I would unsubscribe from Netflix. So there's a business rationale also in Stratechery's case for not being psychotic about it, because
also
you can grow the pie.
I grow by word of mouth, right? So I want it to be easy to share my stuff. Like, people, quote unquote, I put it in the bottom of every email. I'm like, hey, if you want to share a couple, that's fine, right? I'm like, if you want to sign up for a corporate account, please contact me. But at the end of the day, that you just have to be okay with it. There is benefits to that. And so I tie this all together. It was, I think, what Andrew was referring to, which is, I think the way to think about this specific, we'll set aside the ChatGPT stuff in a moment, but where I talked about this automated enforcement was, I think automated enforcement is a valid approach at the aggregator level. And this is what YouTube does, by the way. And I think YouTube's approach is actually brilliant. So there was this big issue with copyrighted music on YouTube. And people would just, of course you don't want someone like Napster uploading a random song and getting credit from it. But the problem was, you'd have situations like people would upload footage from a birthday party and there was a song playing in the background and the video would get taken down because of copyright violation. That's no good, right? So what YouTube actually did is it cut a deal with the music labels where they automatically scan, and any sort of video that has copyrighted music in it, any monetization that happens in that video, the record labels get their cut. So it's just sort of all automatic. And you as a user, as an uploader, don't need to worry about the music. Like, now you might, if you're obsessed about making money with your video, then sure, you better worry, because a cut's going to get taken from you. But by and large, I think this is a great solution and a great compromise. And it only works with an aggregator. It only works with something like YouTube. I don't think, if you go back to my framework for moderation, as you go down to, should this happen at a platform level? I don't think so. Should it happen at an infrastructure level? Absolutely not. Like just the chilling effect, I think, would be massive there, in addition to all the logistical effects that Andrew has. And so when I talked about this automated enforcement, I'm like, I think this is the answer. Look, you're going to get 95% or 99% of the value. It's
going to be good enough and effective enough.
That's right.
So that you should be in good shape.
Don't worry
that's
about
what was true in music.
Don't worry about the dark edges of the internet, right? Like
yeah.
You don't want to go there. Just take my word for it, right? And so yeah, that was the sort of bit I was getting to here. Now, I will grant, when it comes to the whole point of these LMs, is they do scrape the dark corners of the internet. They do sort of get access to everything. And so, in this narrow sense, sure, that raises new issues. But to me, if I could be like my sort of judge in this case, they're immaterial because they already lost earlier in the case. So we're not going to even have to decide it.
Yeah, well, and I think just in general, to the extent any holding finds that the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work is concerning enough to rule in favor of incumbent copyright holders, the way to police any of this stuff is going to be going to a Spotify, going to a YouTube, going to a Google and saying, this can't exist on your site. So and that's good enough.
You have to lean into the reality of the internet, right? The whole thing with the music labels is the reality is what Spotify did is it sold convenience, right? You can still pirate music. It's just so much easier. Just pay Spotify.
And I
$10
don't
a month,
because
right?
They've made it so exhausting to pirate music because you can't find it on Google anymore. You can't.
Well, not just
find
that.
It on,
it's a carrot and stick approach, right? But like Spotify makes it easy. And so what made the labels, the reason why they've done so well, particularly relative to all their peers in media, is they have a business model that aligns with the internet. They're not fighting the internet. Like fighting the internet is very hard. Stratechery arguably fights the internet in some respects, right? Because I'm trying to artificially paywall a zero marginal cost product. Now, I also benefit from that. I can send out thousands of emails at a time, so it goes both ways. But go with the internet by and large. In this case, if you understand and realize that I'm right, that the nature of the internet is towards aggregators, that's like when you have a frictionless sort of liquid market, you're going to end up with these very large entities that control demand. Lean into that. Let that be the sort of let that be the axis of concern about this. And I think that if you can think about things in sort of relative scale, and don't get obsessed about edge cases, which are trivial to find on the internet because we have search and computers are very good at that, then it becomes much clearer how to proceed with a lot of these issues.